Western Kenya agroforestry spontaneous effort. So the question is, why and what can we do about that? Because the issues that farmers are facing in terms of livelihood insecurity and vulnerability, of course, are growing for lots of reasons. So the question that we've been posing in Eco-Agriculture Partners recently is, how can we reduce the vulnerability of poor farmers and communities to food insecurity, climate change, and risk, and so on, by restoring and sustaining ecosystem services while improving productivity and developing management strategies that enable poor rural communities to withstand economic and climate disturbances and develop capacities for withstanding future disturbances. So to develop climate resilient livelihoods to achieve, we link this idea with food security, livelihood, resilient livelihoods, and food security. And we, like others who started to explore the concept of resilience, find that linking social and ecological resilience and thinking about sort of socio-ecological systems is a useful tool for thinking about scaling up. And we talk now about landscape scale management of socio-ecological systems that can provide the foundations for maintaining ecosystem services to promote through rural, as well as rural livelihoods. Excuse me. So we found a useful concept, this idea of integrated or whole landscape management, and this involves managing agricultural and natural resources as complex socio-ecological systems, managing for multiple objectives, managing in ways that reduce trade-offs and improve synergies, managing adaptively, and managing through participatory processes of social learning. These are sort of the qualities of management that can help to bring about this scaling up of climate-smart agriculture up to landscape scale. So we, like many others, are playing around with this concept of resilience and trying to come up with a framework for resilient landscapes that touches on all of these dimensions that I just talked about that are important if we're going to get, climate-smart agriculture at scale. So don't read the ingredients here; they'll be on record if you want to look at them. But what we've been doing is playing around with what are the qualities or characteristics of these 4 dimensions of resilience. And to derive this information, we've been doing a combination of literature reviews and also exploring projects and programs that are dealing with trying to improve the livelihood resilience of vulnerable populations. So I just am going to run through these slides to give you an idea that of the kinds of characteristics that we're coming up with to characterize these 4 dimensions of resilience. Okay, so we've been working specifically with the World Food Program and partners in northern Kenya, Ethiopia, and Ecuador, a little bit in West Africa, although data from that site aren't in yet, so I won't report on that here. We've also been working with CARE and diverse partners, including WWF and others, in Tanzania, Malawi, and Zambia to explore this question of resilience. And specifically, we're asking the question, what kinds of innovations can build both ecological and social dimensions of resilience so that you get these synergies and efficiencies through your investments in improving the resilience of and food security of vulnerable populations. So on the institutional side, we find that improving product marketing channels is important. Payments for ecosystem services is an important institutional innovation that's coming out of these projects we've been looking at. The importance of spatial planning to optimize the location of technical and institutional innovations. Location matters hugely when you're dealing with living ecosystems and where to prioritize your investments. on improving community and regional infrastructure, diversifying funding sources, and integrating local and scientific knowledge. These are some of the sort of the institutional innovations or interventions that are found to be important that can build the social as well as the ecological dimensions. We also find that effective leadership is absolutely critical. These are some of the qualities that we find in effective leadership. Ed talked about personalities, that's part of it. The willingness to lead, finding people from different sectors and different walks of life who can partner in leadership, we find to be probably the core, one of the most important building blocks for this kind of work. And then there's the whole question of policy as well. And these are more hypotheses than findings at this point, but that we need institutional mechanisms for multi-stakeholder planning, supportive landscape governance and resource tenure, policy support for spatially targeted investment, and policy support for tracking change on different scales for social and climate goals. So thank you very much. And,
It doesn't do that while we go through it. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Celia Harvey, and I'm Vice President of Global Change and Ecosystem Services at Conservation International. And what I want to do this afternoon is give you a quick overview of the role of natural ecosystems in helping farmers to cope with climate change and other risks in Madagascar, based on the work done by the team of colleagues you see here. So in many tropical regions, including many of the biodiversity hotspots, farming landscapes are really dominated by smallholder production systems. And smallholders who are cultivating very small areas of land, usually less than a couple of hectares. Now, because these farmers are often very poor, have very limited capital and very limited other means of livelihoods, they're very vulnerable to any event that undermines their agricultural productivity. Whether this be gradual changes in weather, or whether it be extreme weather events, or whether it's simple things like pest and disease outbreaks. And when their agricultural production systems and livelihoods are threatened, smallholder farmers often turn to natural ecosystems to provide them with the food, the firewood, and the other products they might need for their livelihoods. However, in many cases, we know very little about how farmers are managing the risks to their agricultural systems, and even less about how they're using the natural ecosystems. Yet if we are interested in conserving the natural ecosystems and the ecosystem services that they're providing to people, we need to have a much better understanding of why and how farmers are using these resources, and what we could do to make this management more sustainable. So we are currently in the middle of a 2-year project where we're trying to understand the risks to smallholder agriculture and to identify strategies for enhancing the ability of farmers to cope with these risks. And we're conducting the work in 3 regions of Madagascar shown here, and what we're focusing on are the following questions. First, we're asking what are the main risks to farming systems, and how are farmers being affected by these risks. Secondly, we're asking what are the management and coping strategies that farmers are using to deal with these risks. And third, in particular, we're asking what is the role of natural ecosystems in helping farmers cope with risks. And as I mentioned, we're doing this in 3 regions, and the main way that we are doing the research is through very detailed household and community level surveys. And to date, we've completed over 1,200 surveys. Now, in all 3 regions where we work, agriculture is the main form of livelihood for people, with 99% of the households depending on agriculture for their livelihoods. Most of the farmers are smallholder farmers, as you can see, with typically less than 1.45 hectares of land. They cultivate rice or maize for home consumption. Most of the farmers are very poor. We're talking about communities that earn typically less than $400 in a year. and they have limited access to credit, limited access to savings, they're in remote locations, poor road infrastructure. So we're generally talking about highly marginalised and very remote communities. So what kind of risks are the farmers in these landscapes facing? So based on our survey of these 600 households, it's clear that farmers are routinely facing both idiosyncratic production risks as well as risks from extreme weather events. So as you can see from this graph, on a typical year, over 80% of the farmers suffer poor production from too little rain. Another 80% or so suffer severe damage from pests. And then a smaller amount, but also significant, numbers of farmers suffering problems with diseases, from crop loss during storage, particularly to rats and mice, and in some cases, poor production from too little rainfall. In addition, these landscapes often experience very extreme weather events, which further reduce their agricultural productivity. So you can see here, just in the last 5 years, over 65% of the farmers have experienced extreme drought, 50% have been affected by cyclones, and just over 40% have experienced severe flooding. So we're talking about communities that are highly vulnerable to these extreme weather events. Now obviously these events have very significant impact on people's livelihoods. For example, farmers regularly lose significant portions of their crop to drought, as seen in the photo. This graph shows, for example, that 42% of the farmers are losing between 25 and 50% of their crop in years of drought, and another 27% are losing up to 75%, and some even suffer complete crop losses. And these losses due to crop productivity also then translate into loss of family income. So what are farmers doing to cope with this food insecurity, to cope with, I'm missing a slide, hang on, we can go forward, I think things out of order. So in addition to having these problems of crop losses and income losses, you also have an accompanying impact on food security. So in a typical year, you have 70% of the farmers in each region lacking sufficient food to feed their families. This lean season starts in October or November, and it continues often through March. And when you have the extreme weather events, the food security becomes even more severe. So as an example, following a drought, you often have, on average, families spend 3.2 months being hungry. And then when you have cyclones, you have the added additional problems of significant damage to houses, bridges, roads, which makes it even harder for them both to get food and also to get any products they do have left over to markets. Let me go back, sorry, I'm looking out of order here. Now, how are the farmers coping with this food insecurity? Well, there are 4 main ways they're responding. The first, very strange, sorry. The very first thing they do is simply eat less food or eat smaller quantities. If they have any money available, they buy additional food, but that's very difficult given their economic conditions. A small percentage relies very heavily on wild foods from the neighbouring forests. And very interestingly, even though there are over 75 NGOs and local associations in each of these landscapes supporting the communities, less than 1% of farmers receive any kind of food aid or any kind of agricultural extension assistance. So, in addition to dealing with food insecurity, farmers are also having to deal with the fact that they have little income to buy food or to meet any of their other needs. So other coping strategies that they use, those farmers that have any livestock, and if they do, they usually have 1 or 2 animals. Most of them will sell the livestock in times of stress. A very typical response is also to send members to go work on other farms as labourers, or to work outside the farm in any kind of job they can find, and 20% also borrow money. But again, this is very difficult due to lack of access to credit and loans. So moving on, what is the role of natural ecosystems in helping farmers cope with these risks? Well, natural ecosystems are really fundamentally important to all of these communities. First, most farmers, natural ecosystems are a really key source of materials for firewood. It's the main fuel wood for over 90% of the families. Many farmers, or most farmers, are collecting fuel wood not only from their land, but they're going to communal grazing lands, they're going to communal forest lands, they're going to protected areas to collect firewood for cooking. And this is true both in routine years as well as in periods of extreme stress. Secondly, farmers turn to the remaining forest to harvest wild plants and animals for home consumption. The most important of these are wild yams, which sustain many families during this lean period. And a quarter of the family routinely collect wild yams each year to ensure that they have enough food during the low season. In addition, natural ecosystems are really important as building materials for rebuilding homes. In the last cyclone alone, over 80% of the houses in these areas were damaged by cyclones, and farmers will go to the forest to collect palms and other trees, leaves to rebuild and rethatch their homes. And last but not least, when areas have been degraded or when areas have been destroyed, obviously the forest also offers opportunities for cultivation through slash and burn. Now, as you see, the natural ecosystems are really important for small-scale farmers, for their livelihoods and for their continued survival following some of these extreme events. But obviously, all of these practices shown here at the same time, if done unsustainably, are going to undermine the natural ecosystems and their ability to conserve biodiversity and their ability to provide ecosystem services. And so this is why, if we can work, the conservation community can work more closely with farmers to help them make them less vulnerable to climate change, less vulnerable to some of these agricultural risks, we have a much better chance of making management and the long-term conservation of these systems more viable. So what can conservation biologists do to help reduce farmer vulnerability? Well, first of all,